Welcome to the Refuge of St. Joseph. This is a space of silence, prayer, and hope, created to welcome those who carry burdens in their hearts and are seeking the peace to walk with dignity. Today, we unite in the intention, prayer to St. Joseph to pay off debts, asking for light for our decisions, serenity for our emotions, and prudence for each step, confident that divine providence never abandons a home that trusts. If this refuge touches your heart and speaks to your story, please like, subscribe to the channel, and share the video with those who need comfort and direction, because small gestures of sharing become paths of healing when they reach other lives with gentleness. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. May your fatherly presence strengthen our faith and teach us to inhabit daily life with gentle courage, so that hope may find a home in every household praying with us today. You may be hearing these words with a racing heart, a tired mind, and an invisible calculation happening behind your eyes. How much is missing? When it's due? How much I can manage? How much I owe? I see you. I recognize the weight that doesn't show up in the family photo, but presses on your chest at bedtime. The weight that makes your body tense when the phone vibrates, when the email arrives, when the bill pops up. Debts look like numbers, but they touch deep wounds. Shame, fear, a sense of failure. Before anything else, hold this with me. You are not your debt. Your dignity is not measured in installments, and your story does not end on a spreadsheet. What hurts you today, God sees. What paralyzes you today, God reaches. And here, under the protection of St. Joseph, we begin slowly, with respect, with truth. There is a simple secret on which faith and neuroscience agree. The body is the doorway to the peace the soul needs. When the mind perceives threat, and financial instability is a concrete threat, the body goes on alert. The heart races, thoughts speed up, breathing shortens, and everything feels too urgent to be lived calmly. This is not weakness. It's your brain doing what it was created to do, protect you. But in that state, we lose perspective, decide on impulse, avoid what we need to face, or promise what we can't keep. That's why we start at the beginning, soothing the body to calm the mind, calming the mind to open the heart, opening the heart to listen to God. Inhale softly through your nose, as if savoring clean air that loosens tense shoulders. Hold for a moment. Exhale slowly through your mouth, as if setting down a burden you no longer need to carry alone. Do this 2 or 3 times at your pace and notice, the ground holds, the chair holds, God holds. Now bring to mind the workshop of Nazareth. Imagine the scent of freshly cut wood, the afternoon light entering through the doorway, dust dancing in the air, the serene cadence of someone doing what must be done without fuss. There, in a silence that teaches more than many speeches, a just man cared for a family with honest work, an obedient heart, and vigilant faith. The silence of Joseph is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence, not as those who wait for easy miracles, but as those who walk with steady steps, one after another, without betraying conscience. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Intercede for what weighs on us, for what is lacking, for what we try to hide from others, and sometimes even from ourselves. We will not promise what the Church does not promise. Prayer is not a magic shortcut. God is not a heavenly expediter stamping solutions without involving our hearts and our decisions. Faith does not dispense with prudence. Providence does not cancel responsibility. Grace desires our cooperation. At the same time, the spiritual life heals what anxiety fragments, strengthens what shame weakens, and aligns our will with God's will. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer, every wise choice a step of trust, every renunciation of unnecessary spending an act of love toward those who depend on us. Here, spirituality is concrete. It touches bills, contracts, habits, difficult conversations, postponed decisions. Here, prayer gives language to conscience and courage to our muscles. Allow yourself, for a few moments, to feel your body again. Feel your feet on the ground as if putting down roots. Feel your shoulders descend a little, as if lowering your weapons. Feel your hands, maybe cold, maybe trembling, and imagine holding in them everything that worries you. Due dates, numbers, names. Don't hide them. Present them. Courage begins when truth finds a safe lap, and that lap exists in the heart of God. Say, in your own way, even in silence, Lord, I bring my whole reality. I don't want to mask anything. I want to learn to act at the right time with wisdom and perseverance. Notice how by naming the truth, panic loses ground, and in its place a quiet steadiness springs up, the kind that doesn't shout but sustains. St. Joseph teaches us a rhythm, neither anxious haste nor laziness disguised as waiting, a rhythm that respects God's timing and our human part, a rhythm that alternates listening and acting, withdrawing and rising, planning and carrying out. Neuroscience calls this self-regulation, organizing the inside to decide better on the outside. Faith calls it watchfulness, a heart awake to recognize the guiding voice. This is the place I invite you to enter. It's not imaginary. It's a state of presence, you here and now, whole before God, with the debts that exist, the bills that are due, and the possibilities you may not have seen yet. When the excess of stimulus eases, the mind wipes away the fog, and without the noise of despair, hope begins to converse with reality again. Perhaps one part of you says, "It's too late." Another replies, "It's impossible." Still another whispers, "I don't deserve it." I hear these voices with you because they are human, and because fear tends to speak loudly when life presses us. But there is a deeper voice, and it does not come from judgment, it comes from love. It reminds you who you are, son, daughter, called to freedom, called to peace. It is not too late when God walks with you. It is not impossible when prudence meets providence. It's not about deserving when grace visits the home of those who ask with humility. If guilt holds you today, trade guilt for responsibility. If shame paralyzes you, trade shame for truth. If despair isolates you, trade despair for the prayer that opens a path. Say with me, with the simplicity of those who trust, St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for me. Teach me the silence that listens, the obedience that acts, the discipline that perseveres. I place before God my financial life, the debts I know and those I fear to know. I ask for honest work, doors to open, prudence in my choices, courage for necessary conversations, and peace each night. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, my trust is in you. Remain in this spirit for a moment. Breathe again. Notice your body steadier, your head a bit clearer, your heart less tight. This doesn't solve everything, but it changes the ground where your decisions will be made. And better decisions, repeated consistently, change the story. If you feel a thread of hope, hold it gently. We will walk calmly, one step at a time, without shortcuts and without haste. Soon, we will touch wounds with words that heal and actions that sustain, always remembering that in the school of Nazareth, peace is born from the meeting between prayer and work, between faith and prudence, between humility and firmness. The path is open. God's presence is here, and with St. Joseph at our side, every minute of attention becomes an instrument of rebuilding. Sometimes a debt is not a number, it is fatigue in the body, a knot in the stomach, a stiffness in the shoulders that won't go away. The envelope on the table seems light, but weighs like a stone. The app on your phone shows amounts, but what almost no one sees is the heavy silence after each notification, the vacant stare before sleep, the question that insists, "Where did I lose my way?" That question cuts deep because it touches dignity, belonging, the desire to be a good steward of your own household. Yet behind the figures, there is a living, complicated human story. Where there is a story, there is hope. Where there is a wound, there is a path of care. Inside, anxiety creates shortcuts that don't help. It imagines extreme scenarios, feeds shame, paints tomorrow in catastrophic colors. The brain, made to protect, interprets risk in everything and turns any collection notice into a total threat. This is not a defect, not a moral failure. It is biology trying to care. But when fear takes the helm, thinking becomes narrow, the horizon shrinks, and the memory of who you are grows dim. The word debt starts to occupy spaces that don't belong to it. It enters identity, distorts memory, contaminates your relationship with yourself. Even so, one truth stands: you are not your debt. You are loved, called, capable of rebuilding. Shame often isolates. Isolation multiplies the weight. The weight feeds guilt, and guilt almost always paralyzes. The heart knows when it has erred, and precisely because it knows, it cries out for mercy. Not mercy that erases justice, but mercy that puts us back on the axis, so justice becomes a path, not a punishment. At this delicate junction, faith offers a safe place for the soul to breathe again. Today, that place has the face of a just man who guarded God's secret in the house of Nazareth. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. This simple plea drives away the fantasy of a theatrical miracle and brings near the concrete possibility of healing. Less noise inside, more truth in action, a gentler steadiness in the gaze. There are wounds that do not appear in the mirror, but demand daily care. A financial wound is like that. It doesn't bleed outward, but it bleeds inward, draining energy, affection, and self-esteem. When we name this pain, it loses some of the power it exerts in hiding. When we recognize the mixture of fear and pride, a crack opens, and through that crack a light enters that does not humiliate. It brings back contrast, restores contour, and reminds us that every person has infinite worth, and that worth cannot be calculated in bills. Through that light, conscience, previously harassed, speaks again with serenity and points to paths that seemed invisible in the confusion. On the horizon of faith, there is no shortcut that bypasses reality. The Church's tradition, wise and patient, teaches that providence and prudence walk together like the two hands of someone working wood. One guides, the other supports. Grace does not do for us what it asks us to do with maturity, and at the same time it offers strength, calm, and clarity so that maturity can flourish. Therefore, the first turn happens inside. The soul reorients itself by the north of truth, even if the road is long. With less shame, the heart is willing to learn. With less fear, the mind sees nuance again, and little by little the body leaves the state of permanent war to inhabit a more sober, more human place, more available to the good. When conscience finds dignity again, words take on a different texture. God sees me. My family is not a mistake. My story still has pages. Such phrases seem simple, but they are quiet remedies that re-regulate what anxiety had deregulated. Neuroscience calls it reconsolidation of emotional memory. When in a new context of safety, painful memories lose their toxic force and make room for wiser choices. Spirituality calls it healing of meaning. The same fact now breathes different air. The same bill now meets a different stance. The same challenge now speaks with virtues that were already in you and may have been asleep. In daily life, this means the gaze changes before the numbers change. And when the gaze changes, the numbers have a real chance to change. What used to be an absolute threat becomes a manageable responsibility. What used to be a sentence becomes a process. What used to be humiliation becomes a school. Humiliation says, "You are worse than your debt." The school says, "You are greater than your debt." In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence while honestly tending to what is ours today, here, with the resources and limits we have. This meeting between truth and hope inaugurates a new climate in the home, and that climate sustains perseverance, the quiet perseverance that, day after day, moves small, real mountains. At the bottom of every pain, there is a hidden question: will I be cared for? This question, which seems theoretical, is deeply bodily. It decides whether the chest opens or closes, whether the hand trembles or steadies, whether the voice falters or holds. The good news is that when that care becomes palpable, in the look of someone who loves, in the prayer that welcomes with realism, in the memory of a saint who protects, the body registers safety, the mind reorganizes priorities, and the spirit finds its rhythm. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Repeated like wood being patiently sanded, this phrase smooths inner rough edges, returns softness to hope, and prepares the soil for choices that honor truth and respect time. At the end of this inner chapter, the wound doesn't disappear by decree, but it gains contour, name, and boundary, and every named wound can be cared for. Dignity, rescued from the hiding place of shame, sets the pace again. Conscience, illumined by faith, finds paths. The heart, supported by St. Joseph, rediscovers the quiet courage that makes no noise and yet transforms the home. What the spreadsheet does not show yet, the soul already perceives. There is meaning, there is direction, there is presence, and when there is presence, fear loses its exaggeration, guilt loses its lash, and hope returns to its place as guide. Here, where the pain has been seen, prayer ceases to be escape and becomes foundation. Here, where truth has entered, responsibility becomes possible again. Here, where St. Joseph remains, peace begins to learn the way back. In the Church's tradition, grace and effort cooperate, and this cooperation has the serene face of someone who has learned to discern God's timing without abandoning personal responsibility. Providence is not a mystical shortcut that ignores reality. It is a loving presence that prepares possible paths, opens discreet doors, holds us when the ground seems to give way, and at the same time calls forth intelligence, courage, and honesty. Prudence is not fear in disguise, not a cold calculation that suffocates hope. It is the art of choosing the good that is possible today, with reverence for truth and attention to limits. When these two forces join hands, the heart experiences something rare: active peace, hope with its feet on the ground. The Gospel shows Joseph receiving indications in dreams and responding with concrete, quiet, precise decisions. There is no fanfare, no negotiation with God's voice, no postponement. He listens and acts because he trusts. He acts and trusts because he listens. This circular movement, listening that prepares action, action that confirms listening, reveals the logic of providence lived with prudence. In Nazareth, faith did not cancel work. It elevated it. Obedience did not eliminate uncertainties. It crossed through them. Love did not avoid pain. It gave meaning to each step. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence, while we adjust our hearts to see the good that is offered in the now. There are two extremes that sabotage the indebted soul. On one side, the magical enchantment that expects everything to be resolved without participation, as if God replaced conscience. On the other, the cynicism that shuts the windows and declares that nothing changes, as if God were no longer at the table. Prudence, illumined by providence, inhabits the living middle between these distortions. It recognizes that every choice has consequences, and therefore tends to the small fidelities that transform tomorrow. It knows that grace works in the concrete and therefore pays attention to details previously overlooked. A possible conversation, a reordering of priorities, a discrete work opportunity, a quiet renunciation that protects what is essential. Neuroscience offers a complementary language for this ancient wisdom. When the brain leaves the axis of panic, the areas responsible for evaluation and planning resume control, and a situation that looked like a labyrinth gains identifiable exits. Prudence, in this sense, can be seen as a form of effective self-regulation that gives the mind back its ability to weigh timelines and risks without surrendering to catastrophe. Providence, in turn, creates the inner climate of safety that allows this self-regulation to happen. The reminder that there is a greater meaning, that one is not alone, that love sustains even when the numbers are not yet smiling. When the soul rests on this ground, alternatives appear that despair cannot see. In daily life, providence and prudence sound like rhythm. The rhythm of someone who honors commitments without doing violence to the spirit. The rhythm of someone who recognizes the superfluous with humility and the essential with reverence. The rhythm of someone who allows himself or herself to learn the language of time, the time to ask for help without shame, the time to speak with candor, the time to reorder the household, the time to say a no that protects, the time to sow with patience. There is no spectacle in this music, but there is beauty. And this beauty sustains the constancy necessary for numbers to change, relationships to be restored, and the heart to be strengthened. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. When work becomes prayer, tasks do not lose their demands, but they gain meaning. When prayer meets work, the soul is not alienated, it takes root. The bread on the table carries the memory of a love that cares, and the spreadsheet that once crushed now begins to tell a story of perseverance. The gaze changes, and with it choices change. Choices change, and with them the climate at home. The climate changes, and with it hope recognizes itself as possible. Providence gives rise to the courage to continue. Prudence turns that courage into a path. In the silence of those who trust, a simple phrase sustains the journey. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. In it, the soul acknowledges its own fragility and at the same time asks for the quiet strength that builds without fuss. Intercession does not replace responsibility, it purifies it. Responsibility does not replace grace, it manifests it. The heart learns to balance contemplation and action, to welcome consolations without losing focus, and to cross aridity without losing direction. In these comings and goings, as in a workshop, the rough surface becomes smoother, and the wood that seemed beyond repair reveals beautiful grain. There is dignity in beginning again, even if the beginning seems too small to be called victory. Prudence calls this smallness a seed, and providence waters it with meanings that purely utilitarian logic cannot perceive. A seed does not impress, but it holds a promise. A promise does not pay bills, but it organizes the spirit so that better decisions can find a place. And when better decisions are repeated, reality begins to yield, not by the force of a trick, but by the force of a love that perseveres. The workshop of Nazareth remains open in the Church's memory, and there we learn that every honest act, every honest calculation, every honest conversation can become a place of encounter with God. In the end, Christian wisdom does not separate heaven from earth. Providence points to heaven, prudence plants our feet on the ground, and the path that reveals itself between the two is human and divine at the same time. On this path, numbers stop being monsters and return to being measures. Due dates stop being threats and return to being markers. Commitments stop being burdens and return to being covenants of love. In the rhythm of St. Joseph, the heart learns to dwell in this discreet harmony where trust does not dispense with care and care does not suffocate trust. And there, where life finds this balance, hope ceases to be theory and begins to take the shape of one's own home. There are moments when prayer feels like a long, beautiful conversation that doesn't cross into concrete life. Words rise, emotions ease for a moment, promises are made in silence, yet the next day remains the same, with the same excuses, the same hesitations, the same averted glances. The gospel surprises us with something else. In Joseph, asking is not only speaking, it is listening deeply and responding promptly. In Matthew chapters 1 and 2, the narrative is concise and radiant. He receives guidance, welcomes it in his heart, and without noise, rises and does what must be done. The request becomes a step, the plea becomes direction, the direction becomes a path. It breaks our expectations because it dispels the fantasy that faith is only comfort and reveals that mature faith moves the body, reorganizes the everyday, and inaugurates a new rhythm. When the heart accepts this logic of readiness, something realigns in the body and the brain as well. Neuroscience describes a subtle circuit. Clear intention reduces ambivalence, reduced ambivalence lowers anxiety, and lowered anxiety returns to the prefrontal cortex, the capacity to deliberate with clarity. In this state, choices that seemed like mountains appear as hills, and hills begin to show visible trails. In simple language, when you listen in truth and respond with serene quickness, the mind leaves the circle of rumination and enters the track of decision. It is not about acting on impulse, but acting at the opportune time before doubt grows wings and turns everything heavy again. The figure of Joseph illuminates this unspectacular readiness. There are no grand phrases, no theatrical gestures, no need for applause. There is a silent, firm, chaste yes. There is a heart that trusts, and precisely because it trusts, it does not push to tomorrow what conscience has already understood today. Joseph's obedience does not spring from fear, it springs from love. It is not servility, it is interior freedom. He does not resort to shortcuts, does not look for excuses, does not dress virtue in anxious haste. He simply keeps the cadence of God's will within his own home. From this cadence springs the calm strength to treat reality as reality, without inflating it or minimizing it. When prayer enters this cadence, quiet movements begin to happen. Expenses kept out of habit lose their shine, as if the light had shifted to reveal what was never essential. Advice once avoided becomes welcome, and the presence of someone who sees from the outside restores perspective. Due dates, once a confusing heap, find their place in a breathable order, and the schedule returns to dialogue with truth. Easy credit offers that waved like salvation lose their seductive power when seen in the light of maturity. None of this is born from a list of orders, but from a loving obedience that reorganizes priorities on the inside until outward choices become consistent with what the heart already understood. There is a subtle temptation that often delays the crossing, avoidance disguised as prudence. Sometimes we say we need to think it over, when in truth we are buying time not to decide. Other times we say the right time will come, but the right time has already arrived and is only waiting for the courage of a first step. In these detours, self-accusation grows, the body stiffens, and hope gets cornered. Joseph teaches a different way. Without noise, without endless debates with his own fear, he crosses the threshold between conviction and action. That threshold is narrow and precious because there the person discovers he or she is capable of trusting and acting without losing gentleness. A heart that learns to obey promptly acquires a special quality of presence. It is not haste, it is precision. It is not cold rigor, it is warm clarity. And this quality echoes in relationships, in speech, in the way we look. An apology is not postponed to a convenient day. A necessary conversation finds a possible window. A commitment is honored, even if comfort is not guaranteed. This way of life has a therapeutic effect because it reduces the distance between professed values and daily gestures. When the distance shrinks, shame loses ground, and identity can breathe again. The soul recognizes itself in what it does, and the body registers coherence as relief. In emotional language, asking and obeying promptly means not letting fear dictate the length of silence. Fear demands long deadlines so that nothing changes. Hope offers short ones so that something changes. That something does not need to be grand to be true. Often it is almost invisible, yet it is this almost invisible thing that begins to bend the river's course. In the workshop of Nazareth, every gesture counted, every gesture had direction, every gesture was a slice of fidelity. The miracle there had no spotlights, it had continuity, and continuity, when born of love, is the most discreet and most concrete form of transformation. The mind learns through repetition, and the soul loves what it repeats with meaning. That is why obedient readiness shapes the brain like sanding wood. Layer by layer, the texture changes. The rigidity that seemed definitive gives way to a smoother, stronger surface. A beautiful paradox. By losing roughness, it gains strength. So it is with the heart that abandons chronic indecision. By choosing at the right time, without violence and without unnecessary delay, it becomes both steadier and more docile, steady to sustain what it decided, docile to adjust the route when truth asks for it. Against this horizon, the phrase "St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us" matures and gains depth. It is not a request to avoid reality. It is a request to cross it with dignity. It is not an attempt to outsource responsibilities. It is a way of belonging to a larger story that sustains and purifies. Where this phrase becomes the ground, anxious hurry calms down and procrastination loses its mask. The heart aligns, the gaze clears, the body finds the right timing of the hands, and the spiritual life ceases to be a decoration to become the very nerve and muscle of existence. In the end, this breaking of expectations leads us to the simplest and most demanding place. Asking is not merely declaring desires. It is making room for God's answer to meet our movement. Obeying promptly is not obeying out of fear. It is responding out of love. Between one and the other, a path is born where heaven touches the ground, where providence illumines and prudence sustains, where hope learns to walk to the rhythm of the real. And so what seemed unchangeable begins to move, not to the eyes of those seeking spectacle, but to the eyes of those who recognize in faithful, ordinary life the silent mark of a grace at work. In many homes, there is a moment in the day that becomes a shelter. 7 minutes that, because they are so simple, almost go unnoticed but carry the strength of a fresh start. The room grows quieter, the light seems to rest on objects, and the body lowers the noise that was coming from within. In this small interval, faith meets breathing, tradition meets the science of care, and the heart learns to inhabit its own story more gently. What happens there is not spectacle, it is presence. Presence restores shape to thoughts and gives the body the sense that the ground holds. The beginning often arises from the sign of the cross, an ancient gesture that does not prevail by its size, but by its meaning. The hand touches forehead, chest, shoulders, and the body registers a message of belonging. Breathing then receives gentle attention. Air enters and spreads through the ribs, as if opening space inside. Air leaves, taking with it stiffness that no longer serves. Neuroscience calls this encounter self-regulation. The soul calls it silent prayer. When breathing finds its rhythm, the nervous system leaves constant alarm, and the mind, less pressured, returns to seeing reality without exaggeration. The heart calms not because it denied the debts, but because it found a true way to look at them. Soon after, Scripture lights a soft lamp. The passage from Matthew 1:19-24, even read in just a few lines, opens a window into the workshop of Nazareth, a just man who listens, a dream that guides, an obedience that becomes a step. Some days a single phrase keeps resonating, and that quiet repetition becomes nourishment. Memory holds the scene, imagination offers color and texture, and the life of Joseph ceases to be a distant page to become a reference for rhythm and care. The silence of Joseph is an invitation to listen to the heart of God, and the word, welcomed in this way, does not weigh us down, it guides. Then comes the moment when truth is named. Financial reality appears whole, without makeup, like laying the bills on the carpenter's bench. Naming does not humiliate, it sets boundaries. By gaining contour, worry becomes manageable, and the body that had been shrinking opens the chest again. Neuroscience describes this passage as reduced emotional load through conscious labeling. The spiritual tradition describes it as confident presentation to God. In both languages, the effect is similar. Anxiety loses volume, guilt loses its whip, and dignity breathes. At the center of this small rite, a short invocation lands like a well-placed hammer. 3 gentle knocks on a door we know will open. St. Joseph, provide for us. 3 times the plea crosses the room, and 3 times the heart recognizes it is not walking alone. There is something deeply therapeutic in this brief invocation, because the brain learns by repetition, and the soul loves what it repeats with meaning. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. When this phrase returns day after day, it trains the gaze to wait for the right time and to act with the serenity that is possible. From that trust, one purpose arises at a time, not a catalogue of goals, but a concrete, human, breathable decision. The inner life finds a simple action that matches the truth of the day and fits the measure of one's strength. The heart recognizes this purpose when it is born of peace and not of haste, of clarity and not of fear. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer, and when that prayer requires hands and a schedule, it restores to daily life a dignity that pressure had obscured. Small fidelities, repeated consistently, produce the kind of transformation that does not shout, but endures. When the circle completes, the words of tradition seal what has been lived. The Our Father teaches again the rhythm of trust. The Hail Mary wraps the home in the tenderness of a yes. The Glory Be returns to life the greater horizon that sustains everything. This threefold cadence re-educates affections, repositions priorities, and sketches inside the peace that is possible. The final gesture does not end the struggle, but indicates to whom the last word belongs. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence and, little by little, discover that serenity is not a luxury, it is a state of loving readiness. A brief supplication often arises with these words, said with reverence and truth. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for me. I place these debts, name them before you, and ask for prudence, open doors for work, and uprightness to honor each commitment. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, I entrust my finances to you. Amen. When this prayer finds shelter in the heart, the home's atmosphere changes. Dignity returns to the center of the table, hope takes the empty chair, and courage sits down with them to share the bread of perseverance. Over 9 days, the novena traces a path of spiritual maturity that coincides with very concrete human needs. One day, silence learns to listen without defending itself. Another day, obedience reveals itself as inner freedom. Then, prudence illumines choices and protects what is essential. Purity of intention restores to the heart the clarity of why. Fortitude presents itself as gentle stability. Patience teaches how to honor processes. Labor gives the hands the joy of what is useful and just. Fidelity ties daily life to professed truth. Hope, finally, lifts the gaze and prevents the weight of the moment from erasing the horizon. Along this path, quiet gestures arise naturally, reviewing numbers that were confused, seeking honest income that respects conscience, a candid conversation that unties old knots, a silent renunciation that safeguards what matters. Nothing happens by imposition. Everything is born from a heart aligning itself with God's cadence. This set of 7 daily minutes and 9 days of learning does not promise shortcuts. It promises roots. Roots do not show, but they hold the tree. So too the soul trained in this cadence. On the outside, the landscape may remain demanding. On the inside, the ground grows firmer. And when the ground firms up, the body organizes itself. The mind plans more clearly. Speech finds the right tone, and the household begins to experience a peace that does not depend on chance, but on the quiet fidelity that repeats itself. It is this simple, constant fidelity that reshapes the numbers and gives life back the shine of honest things. The workshop of Nazareth remains a founding image. On the bench, wood, tools, golden dust. Nothing extraordinary to hurried eyes, everything extraordinary to those who recognize the grace hidden in the ordinary. There, a just man learned to be father, husband, worker, and guardian. There, providence and prudence made their home. And from that house is born the gentle courage to pass through the days one after another until the story that seemed stuck finally begins to move. In the beginning, the workshop rests in a light that does not hurt the eyes. There is the scent of resin, a golden dust settling in the air, quiet tools holding stories of care. The board in the center is not perfect. It carries a subtle bow, an almost stubborn deviation that, up close, displays the memory of time. The scene does not speak of haste, it speaks of presence. This is the place where patience becomes form, where silence bears the weight of wisdom, and where firmness is not confused with harshness. There, what is warped is not discarded. It is straightened. Every piece of wood carries grain and knots that tell of sun, rain, winds, and waiting. Debts also carry trajectories, curves of choices, emotional storms, inexperience, and fears. The craftsman does not fight the nature of the wood. He learns to converse with it. A maturing heart learns something similar. Instead of inner war, dialogue with reality. Instead of violence, method. Instead of despair, a rhythm that respects limits and possibilities. None of this cancels the work's demands, but it restores dignity to the gesture. Financial life is like wood that has warped. It is not broken, it is straightened. The silence of Joseph is the workbench, prayer the square, the budget the sandpaper, each installment paid, a new pass of the plane. With patience and truth, God turns chaos into a sturdy piece of furniture for your home. This image, so concrete, names something the soul feels. If there is a stable place on which to rest the inner world, the hand finds direction. The bench welcomes without suffocating. The square guides without wounding. The sandpaper removes excess without destroying. The plane restores alignment without crushing. The bench of silence offers a base for the soul to rest without needing to justify itself all the time. Silence here is not escape, it is soil. In the soil of silence, the square of prayer can touch the edges of fear and indicate angles of truth. The square does not humiliate. It measures gently, points out deviations, and returns a reference. In the wake of that reference, the budget becomes sandpaper. It removes what scratches, softens irregularities, and reveals, beneath the roughness, a shine that was hidden. And when the surface recognizes its contour, the plane finds its cadence, and each honored installment, each respected commitment, acts like a calm glide that straightens, millimeter by millimeter, a story that seemed irretrievable. The body understands this process. A steady rhythm calms a system that was on alarm, predictability reduces the sense of threat, and the brain, relieved of constant shocks, offers focus and useful memory again. Neuroscience describes this as plasticity, cultivated by meaningful repetition. Stable gestures rewrite unstable circuits. The heart recognizes the same phenomenon with different words, gentle fidelity that generates peace. The regular sound of the plane, even imagined, reminds the body that there is a possible cadence between demand and rest, between task and meaning. The metaphor also embraces the knots. A knot is not an absolute defect, it is an event. It demands care, the right tools, and double patience. Financially, some knots are born of unforeseen events, others of sincere mistakes, others of older wounds. Treatment changes according to the knot, and conscience perceives that certain marks do not disappear completely, but can become beauty. When wood receives finish over a knot, it reveals a unique design. When life welcomes the truth of its past without hiding, it gains a density that supports the future. A sturdy piece needs square joints. Spiritual squareness appears when inner truth and outward truth recognize each other. On that line, the language of conscience loses its accusatory tone and gains the timbre of clarity. What fits today? What does not fit yet? What must never return? From there, the sandpaper of the budget ceases to be punishment and becomes care. Care that protects the essential, that brings back shine to the surfaces most touched in the home, that gradually allows the environment to breathe without jolts. In the heart of Nazareth, nothing good is forced into haste. Time matures the wood, the hand learns the exact weight, and the tool becomes an extension of the gesture. In St. Joseph, strength appears without fanfare, constancy needs no witnesses, and peace is born from the agreement between conscience and love. This same quiet strength becomes possible in financial daily life. Commitments kept as one tends a sensitive edge, discreet preventions that avoid larger cracks, choices repeated until direction becomes habit. There comes a moment when the furniture, at last, lets itself be seen. It is not perfect, it is true. Signs of the process remain. Here a slight ripple, there a more pronounced grain, over there a knot that turned into beauty. When the body looks, it recognizes serenity in that peace that now bears weight without complaint. The household around it seems grateful. The whole environment changes when something regains its function. The soul also changes when the story, despite its marks, again supports day and night with dignity. In this setting, a light phrase keeps the cadence and prevents discouragement from returning to the work sobre a qual se coloca a vida. Silent guardian, intercede livros, retratos, pão. The plea, brief and steady, does not promise spectacle, it promises company. And company, for those who carry much, feels like rest. The presence of Joseph, guardian of the Holy Family, reminds us that living is often to straighten gradually. Accept time. Honor the material we hold in our hands. Recognize that grace does not replace work, but fills it with meaning. In the end, the board that warped and was tended becomes a safe surface on which life is placed. Silverware, books, photos, bread. Upon it, the story finds rest and usefulness, and the heart discovers that the deepest miracle usually takes the shape of perseverance. The workshop remains open within memory, and the lesson does not end. Do not break, straighten. Do not humiliate, reorient. Do not give up. Learn the rhythm. In the cadence of St. Joseph, the whole household reorganizes, and hope, without shouting, learns to remain. At this moment, the home grows quiet, as if returning to the heart the right to breathe without haste. The mind that ran all day finds a resting place. The body that carried so many invisible burdens recognizes a lap. Under this calm, we present to God what we are and what we have. Numbers that hurt, due dates that unsettle, stories that ask for healing. Not to hide, but to bring into the light. Not to be measured by debts, but to be reminded of the dignity that no debt can erase. God, who knows the most secret grain of human wood, receive our truth. We acknowledge good choices and wounded choices, surprises that struck us and omissions that led us astray. We ask for sobriety where there is excess, humility to learn, and fortitude to persist. Where there is confusion, light a lamp. Where there is hardness, place gentleness. Where there is shame, Pour out mercy that does not humiliate. Gather up as one collecting shavings from the workshop floor, everything that has scattered within us. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. The silence of Joseph is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. Teach us the cadence that listens and acts, the courage that does not shout and sustains, the fidelity that does not appear and transforms. Walk ahead of us when we lack horizon. Walk beside us when fear wants to control our step. Walk behind us when our backs need protection. In your discreet presence, the soul relearns a trust that does not depend on applause. In our depths where anxiety sets off alarms and thought becomes a whirlwind, we ask for rest. May the circuits of fear find calm. May painful memory be touched by new meaning. May breathing find cadence like one following the regular sound of a plane. The peace we ask for is not escape. It is ground, active peace, aligning body, mind, and spirit for the possible good of each day, without fantasizing shortcuts and without losing hope. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence. May doors to honest work open. May fair opportunities appear. May prudence accompany every decision. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. May contracts be clear, words be true, and the hand that signs be guided by a right conscience. Where there is temptation toward easy solutions, grant clarity. Where there is weariness, grant perseverance. Where there is temptation to give up, grant memory of the love that sustains us. We remember also those who wait for us, people to whom we owe, people who trust in our commitment, people who share our table and our nights. May justice find possible paths. May reparation not humiliate. May generosity not be confused with imprudence. And may charity not separate truth from affection. Give us a unified heart, where faith does not contradict life and life does not deny faith. Let these three simple and concrete blessings arise over our home. Light where there is fog, order where there is noise, hope where there is weariness. Light to see the next step without panic. Order so that what is essential is protected. Hope so that constancy tastes like a future. And as we walk, may your presence, St. Joseph, remind us that holiness is made of small, steady steps and that grace, when it finds fidelity, redraws stories. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, my trust is in you. May the peace born of truth find a home in our hearts. May the serenity born of trust visit our sleep. May the joy born of honest work perfume our days. And under your fatherly gaze, may our home learn, little by little, the humble rhythm of reconstruction. Amen.